On bilingual education in California, Spencer Michaels reports.
In California schools, the battle over bilingual education remains pitched, despite the passage last June of Proposition 227, which was designed to eliminate it.
Proposition 227 establishes a program to intensively teach children to read and write English as soon as they begin school.
More than 60% of California voters approved Prop 227.
And you guys can all read the page together, and then we'll let each one of you read it. Okay?
Half the nation's children who are not proficient in English live in California. Before the election, 500,000 of them were enrolled in bilingual ed, where Spanish is used to help teach. But the new law directs schools to place students with limited English proficiency into classes where English is the only language spoken, so-called English immersion.
I am lucky.
Silicon Valley businessman Ron Unz, who authored the measure because he alleged bilingual was a failure, now says many schools are not complying with the new law.
The vast majority really seem to either be trying to avoid the initiative or get around it, or really just try to keep the status quo as if the initiative had never passed.
Although no statewide figures are available, many districts admit they have not eliminated bilingual classes. In Redwood City, south of San Francisco, the school district reports that 80% of Spanish-speaking children are still enrolled in bilingual. At Hoover School, the parents of these children have requested waivers that exempt them from the English-only classrooms. And almost all those waivers have been granted, allowing the bilingual classes to continue. Esperanza Magana decided to use the waiver to keep her 9-year-old boy in a bilingual class.
I decided to keep my boy in a Spanish class still because it's kind of confusing for them to just change him from one day to another to English class. Right now he's getting homeworks in Spanish and English, and I think that helps him a lot because they're getting him into English.
Proposition 227 allows waivers for children with special educational needs whose educational development would benefit from an alternate course of study. The district argues that most children benefit from the bilingual approach, which makes it legal under the new law. But Ron Unz says the waivers are being used illegally.
The initiative says parents of young children can apply for waivers, and if there's evidence that that particular child, for whatever reason, will benefit from a bilingual program, then the waiver can be granted. Instead, school districts are simply providing mass waivers to all these students and keeping them in a bilingual program, even if the average test score of children in that program is abysmally low. And that's what it is.
Measure. Remember we measure how tall we are over there with Clifford?
For the 20% of Redwood City's Spanish-speaking students whose parents did not request waivers, new English immersion classes were begun. Genoveva Quezavas, mother of a kindergartner, opted out of bilingual.
I want to learn perfect English, the same as Spanish, because I can teach her Spanish.
Well, what was wrong with the bilingual classes? Why didn't you want her in there?
Because bilingual classes, they gonna give more Spanish than English, and I want more English for her than Spanish.
Middle.
This is the kind of class envisioned by Prop 227 sponsors, where English is used almost exclusively. Under the law, students will remain in these classes learning English for a year and then join the mainstream. Unz believes tests will show this method works, and that should convince schools to follow the law.
Now, once the new test scores come out and with legal action on our part, I think we certainly will see much higher degrees of compliance.
But Alison Reed, who taught bilingual last semester, finds it frustrating teaching her new first grade class without using Spanish.
We can communicate in Spanish, but yet we're not allowed to by law, and so I'm speaking in English all the time. It's hard to really get much writing and reading going because they just don't know the words. So even though they see them on the paper, it doesn't make a lot of sense to them.
The Berkeley School District is even more adamant about keeping bilingual ed. Here, virtually all of the Spanish-speaking children were placed in bilingual classes using parental waivers. And Berkeley went further. It requested a district-wide general waiver from the law and is leading a lawsuit against the State Board of Education to get such a waiver. Jack McLaughlin is superintendent.
Berkeley wants the right to be able to teach a student how to read in their native language. That's what we want the right to do.
But in a sense, you're saying, well, the people may have voted for this, but we don't agree.
Well, no, we don't agree. We don't agree, and most educators don't agree. It is not sound research or based in any kind of research that's been done that says, you know, you jam students with English in a short period of time and deny them access to the remainder of the curriculum.
Of the 400 students at Berkeley's Thousand Oaks School, more than a third have limited English proficiency, and in the past spent 3 or 4 years in bilingual classrooms before moving into mainstream English classes. Catalina Jimenez successfully followed that path.
My teacher, she would have like one day where she would speak only English, or well, a little bit of Spanish, and then the next day she would talk Spanish and a little bit of English. Because for some of the kids that didn't know how to talk English, it was good because the teacher would actually help them and not just force them to talk only English.
El producto más chiquito.
Now Catalina has graduated to a 4th grade all-English class, and Edgar is in a mainstream 5th.
I got problems with some words. Not with all of them.
When you have a problem with a word, what do you do now that you're in just a regular English class?
I tell the teacher how you pronounce it.
Prop 227 sponsor Ron Unz sees continued use of bilingual classes in the primary grades in Berkeley and other districts as attempts to avoid his law and to prolong the statewide argument over bilingual education, when in fact it should be over. He says educators cling to bilingual when the test scores show it is harming children.
Within California, children enter the public schools speaking 140 different languages. The only language group that receives large availability of native language so-called bilingual programs are Spanish-speaking immigrant children. And they are the one immigrant group that does the worst in school with the highest dropout rates and the lowest test scores and the lowest rate of admissions to college. The reason they're doing so badly is they don't learn how to read or write English properly in the schools, since the schools don't teach them English at a young age.
But these days at Thousand Oaks School, that argument carries as little weight as it did before the election. Kevin Wooldridge, a former bilingual teacher, is the principal.
I think that's an oversimplified conclusion. I mean, you really have to look at the socioeconomic situation of each family, the education level of the parents, what the kids are exposed to, what kind of support they have, both in the community and in school. Typically, kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds don't achieve to the extent of middle-class kids and upper-middle-class kids. That cycle of underachievement is not language-specific.
While the education arguments didn't end with the vote, neither did the political and legal. San Francisco's school district is continuing all its bilingual programs, claiming it needs to in order to comply with a federal court order that supersedes Prop 227. The court directed the schools to provide equal education to students who don't speak English and accepted bilingual education as a way to achieve that. By contrast, officials in Los Angeles, the state's largest district, say they are committed to compliance. At present, only about 10% of parents have requested waivers, and so the number of students in bilingual education has been reduced by 90%. Superintendent of Schools Ruben Zacarias says the district must follow the new law, though his own feelings about bilingual's effectiveness are mixed.
We should and will follow the law, and Proposition 227, good or bad, is the current law. My issue with bilingual education was not the methodology, but the fact that, in my mind, it was taking too long to effect that transition from the child's primary language to English acquisition. In this district, it was taking sometimes 5 to 6 and even longer years to do that.
Many students in Los Angeles English immersion classes still receive some help in Spanish. The large number of waivers granted by other districts throughout the state has prompted Ron Unz to threaten suit.
What these administrators and elected officials should realize is that to the extent that they violate the law, they can be sued and held personally liable by the parents of children whose education is being harmed.
Advisors to newly elected California Governor Gray Davis are debating the best way to deal with Prop 227 and bilingual education. And Ron Unz is working to get a similar measure on the ballot in Arizona.
Point to the word then.